Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to talk to you and learn more about your financial journey. I just wanted to start off by asking, what is your earliest memory of money?
When I think back to some of my earliest childhood memories around money, a couple things come to mind. One, I don't know where it came from exactly, but just this inclination towards savings. I had this little like blue kind of piggy bank thing. It actually looked like a bank vault safe. You had to have a little combination to open it. Had a little slot in the top. You could put your quarters and things in. So I remember from the earliest days of doing money for chores or getting money from grandma and grandpa for a birthday or something like that. Not very much, but little bits here and there about like the feeling of saving and putting it in there. And I can remember another time went to actually open a bank account at the bank, right? And learning about this thing called interest, and my money could make more money, which then in turn led me to turn around and loan money to my younger siblings. I was the oldest of four, running what I called the Bank of Daniel, and I would lend money to them because they were not such good savers naturally, and so they wanted to go and buy things more often. So oftentimes they would have spent their chore money or allowance or whatever we had at the time, and they wanted to get something now. So the whole idea of buy now, pay later. I don't know how I figured that out. I think I was probably like 8 or 9, and like, all right, well, I'll give you this much money today, and then next week when you get paid, you have to give me back that plus more. The idea of interest. So those are definitely some of my earliest memories as a young child. And then when I was 13 or 14, I started cutting grass for a company, knew the owner of it, and actually making quite a bit more doing things like that, working evenings, weekends during the school year, and then much of the summer, and starting to save even more. And that led me to realizing, well, there's more than just bank interest. My grandfather taught me to read the stock tables in the newspaper and look up things like dividends and things like that. So that led me to start getting interested in investing when I was probably around 15, 16. And so once I opened up my Roth IRA around age 18 and started investing some of my lawn mowing earnings, it was like, wow, this is a tool that can provide more opportunities than just bank interest. So those are kind of some core foundational memories when I think back about some of my earliest memories around money.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you shared you don't remember where you got the idea of saving from. It's just,
The idea of saving probably just, I mean, there was some influence from my parents, but not a huge amount. It was more just innate. My experience working with people and their money is that some people tend to be more natural savers than others. I don't know how much of that is nature versus nurture and that whole debate, but yeah, certainly for me, it was more of a tendency, just innate.
yeah. No, I agree with that. I got a really quick lesson in high school about finance, and it just kind of turned that on for me. But yeah, I think it is like internal, like nature. So you mentioned your first job was mowing lawns.
Yes, started cutting grass pretty early, young age.
Okay. So what were the things like, were you kind of saving for a specific goal, or were you just like just having money away? Just was it for you? Like you felt a lot more safe, a lot more stable. What was that like?
For me as a younger kid, is saving money. Some of it was certainly for those bigger term purchases. Like I can remember saving up to purchase like a video game, and that would have required 4, 6, 7 weeks of whatever money I'd accumulated at that time. So certainly not spending it every week on like stuff at the dollar store, trinkets or something like that, like my siblings, as a contrast there. But then there was also this idea of, yes, I want to save, not exactly sure what for, but just having more money gave me more choices, I realized. So early on, as I started cutting grass, I think I had this idea at the time that one of our neighbors was a private pilot. He had taken us up in his plane once, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll want to learn how to fly someday." So, knowing flying lessons, I never ended up doing that because I had other interests at the time. Um, but then, of course, as looking ahead to college and education options around that, my parents had a discussion with me at some point of like, hey, you're gonna have to figure out this college thing kind of on your own. We don't have any income or support. We didn't have a 529 funder or something. So that ultimately led me to start looking into ROTC and the scholarship offers through ultimately what became Air Force ROTC for me to be able to do that. So I had this vague notion that I needed to save for some kind of future purchases. It ended up going to do things like pay for college and a first car and things like that. But early on, no, it wasn't like any one big thing. It's more just like having more gave me more choices.
Yeah. And then, like you said, you use that to charge to make more money. So you charged your siblings interest and all that. So that was a
It's
good.
funny though, the idea of me charging my siblings interest. I don't think my parents even knew it was happening at the time, and if they did, they might not have permitted it. So, some funny things that mom will come back. What, you kids are doing what? I don't know how we got around. It wasn't like I was trying to be sneaky, but I just wasn't something that she was aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny though. But that's what happens. You taught them early on, like how the real world works. Like if you borrow money, you're going to have to pay interest. Do you have any memories of having any type of financial lessons from your parents? You mentioned your grandfather showed you a little bit about investing when you got older, but do you remember having any financial lessons or discussions with your family or elders in your life about money?
When I think about the story of my family of origin around money, it was probably more of a taboo topic than certainly today. It was not a frequent discussion. Um, Certainly, I had no idea what my dad made or anything relative to that. Looking back now with the benefit of hindsight as an adult, we were probably in that very lower middle class kind of range. My dad was a civil servant, and my mom stayed at home once kids are around. So, not a lot of extra money to go around. So, when we went on vacations, it was to visit family, or if it was to a work conference that my dad was getting paid to. So, he was already going to get mileage and hotels covered. But the beauty of childhood, is when you don't have a lot of social comparisons. We didn't have a lot of other people at different socioeconomic statuses in our social groups. I didn't know any different, and we still had a great time. And it was never about of deprivation, but certainly probably the biggest lessons that looking back were just learning how to budget and spend responsibly, right? Not live beyond your means. My parents had some strong convictions around debt, and so they never had any. Not even a mortgage. I mean, they paid cash for a house because that was something that was important to them. So that was some strong lessons learned. But they did not teach about investing and long-term savings for the future. That was lessons that I learned from other people. So definitely some benefits to the live within your means approach, but certainly some gaps that got filled in, thankfully, by other people.
Yeah. Okay. So as you were growing into young adulthood, you said you started working and mowing lawns and like were there any changes when you started making your own money? I know you said you continue to save, but in your mind, were there any um like turning points or even into teenage years, college? What was your experience with money like around that time?
Yeah. So at the stage of I'm starting to earn money on my own, this is going to be a funny example, but back to the idea of we didn't have a lot growing up. So whenever we went out to eat, which was not very often, we only drank water. And so now here I am earning fairly good money, certainly for a teenager doing yard care, lawn care kind of work. And I remember one time coming back from a job and stopped at Wendy's to get a burger and stuff like that. And I ordered a Coke with it. And it was something that it's not like we never had soda. We did on rare occasions, and certainly at other people's houses and stuff like that. We'd buy it for home consumption, but we never ever drank it eating out. Just a way to cut expenses, right? So for me, the idea of like, oh, I can spend my own money and I can get whatever I want. In that time, it happened to be that. But that was such a small realization of like, wow, when I have back to the idea of more funds of my own gives me choices and options that I want to do. I mean, it wasn't something that I did often, but I distinctly remember that being, oh, this is a realization of what I can do differently with kind of my money. Ultimately, that same lesson then I carried over as I went off to college, thanks to some scholarships and then a stipend that I earned through that, and then other income. I was had enough money while I was there at school to make some of those choices, and how much I enjoyed spending money on eating out. And so that was a fun thing to be able to do. Again, something we didn't do very often growing up. And when it was, it felt more constrained. So even today, as an adult, many, 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 many years later, it's still one of my favorite things to spend money on. And I wonder how much of it is because it was something I didn't have early on.
Yeah, yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. Like it's kind of like a treat for you, and just like when you, like you said, started making money, that's one of the first memories, like being able to afford anything you wanted when it came to food. I think a lot of us love spending money on food,
Yes.
not just as to live, but like, just the experience of eating and just like trying different things. So when you got to college, did you, as you were interacting with different people, you mentioned earlier as a kid, you don't really have these, um, there's nothing to compare, or you weren't thinking like that. But as you got older, I, started to mingle with different people from around the world, because that's really what college, brings so many people together. Did you notice any differences? Did you, like, because your world was a little opened up a little more, were there any, did that affect your idea of money?
As I got exposure to different socioeconomic statuses and people of different family of origins, I went to college at Purdue University, which had a very, very large international student population, roughly about a third when I was there. And so my first roommate was actually from a different country, from Taiwan. And that helped give me exposure to very different kind of worldviews, philosophies around money from not just different parts of the American culture across the United States, but even around the world. And so getting to see and hear about stories about families who did vacation very differently, kind of like what I mentioned earlier than us, jet setting and five-star resorts and things that I had never experienced at that point in time. But at the same time, seeing some common themes, right? You could have a lot of money and still be use it poorly, or in the case, sometimes even the case of being miserable, even with lots of spending money. And then those who had very little, but if they managed or controlled it well, often seemed better off. So that was one of my first questions that I started to explore on my own. I didn't suddenly become a prolific spender now that I had slightly more opportunity, or quote unquote freedom. But I did start to notice, at least in my peer groups within ROTC, especially because there were some who were there on scholarship and that's the only way they were there. And then there were people who were there who, interesting to me, especially early on, were choosing to pay for that. Many people, almost all of them, got on what we call contract by their junior or senior year. So some of their education was going to get paid for. But many of the people, especially my freshman and sophomore year, were at school paying the full freight, sometimes out of state tuition. I was in state, and figuring out, oh, wow, we're getting a similar experience. We're going to have a similar outcome. Every commissions and is going to be paid exactly the same at the beginning of their military career. So that started to bring up interesting questions for me that I think were part of my financial journey, which led me to where I am today, now helping and working with people and their money and their questions around it.
Yeah, so you decided to continue with the military journey post college. What is that correct? Like you said, you okay. So I'm not familiar with the military, even though I attend Mil Money Con. But so you enlisted, is that what it is? Or what was that journey?
So the way ROTC worked, at least when I was there, is so I was awarded a 4-year undergraduate scholarship out of high school. So in exchange for doing ROTC and getting all my tuition paid for, and then I got a small stipend that helped cover other things like housing costs and things like that, plus some book money. Um, so the first year, the freshman year, is what they call the free look. You can try it out. You could walk away at the end of that first year, those first 2 semesters, and say thanks but no thanks, and you wouldn't owe any money back. But if you continued on past that point, you were now under contract. So if I quit ROTC before graduation commission, I would be responsible for paying back a portion or all of the money that had been paid. Alternatively, you could then enlist and go off to basic training and serve your, I think it was 2 years at the time. Ultimately, I really enjoyed it. I did well at it. And so there was no question about continuing on. So at the end of the 4 years, I not only received my degree from Purdue, but I received my commission as an officer. So now I had a scholarship payback period on active duty of 4 years. So 4 years paid for of undergrad, 4 years owed active duty time. So I couldn't have just stayed in for 2 years and then said, all right, peace out, Air Force, I'm done. So that's the way it worked. Academy is slightly different. At the time, you served 5 years to pay back your education commitment, things like that. There's other active duty service commitments that come along with it based on training I did later on, and then other things like using the tuition assistance to help pay for my first master's, vesting towards the 9/11 GI Bill. So I had to serve the 4 years, pay off my undergrad ROTC scholarship commitment, and then I had to serve 3 more years to vest fully into my 9/11 GI Bill benefits, which I then used to get my second master's in financial therapy, financial planning from Kansas State University.
Yes, that is actually a path that I am exploring now. Just trying to decide if I want to get the certification or go through that program. But did you study in undergrad? Did you study anything related to finance?
My undergrad at Purdue was in economics. I kind of stumbled into it by accident. In essence, I'd enjoyed that course. I took it in high school. My scholarship basically was like any major in-state tuition rates I could pick. So I looked at things like history and political science and kind of the liberal arts that I really enjoyed, but ultimately decided I want to learn a little bit more of the hard sciences. And so I enrolled in economics and minored in history instead. And that turned out to be a great combination because um, not realizing at the time I was going to become a financial planner and need some of that background, but it's just studying about the choices that people make around money, both at the macroeconomic level, so big economies, but also the micro level, which I really loved. I really loved the microeconomics study. And to my personal interest in finance just really blossomed as a course of that and giving some academic rigor.
Yeah. So, okay, so you studied that, you learned all about the decisions we were making around money. How did your journey progress from there? So you get your degree and you enlist. You continued to um I guess keep that interest in money and personal finance, and then which led you to Kansas State. But yeah, talk a little bit about the journey between undergrad and Kansas State.
So after I joined the military and commissioned, so now I'm sent off to training, and my job is going to have nothing to do with money or economics or anything like that. I was an air
I'm
battle
sorry,
manager.
I'm saying this wrong. Okay, so you did not enlist. It's called commissioned. So when
Yeah,
you go through ROTC, it's called commission. Okay, thank you.
right. No worries. So after commissioning and heading off, my job was as an air battle manager, which had nothing to do with money or personal finance or economics. So a pretty long training pipeline. The first 2 years, roughly, of my time were all just in training, preparing me for the job that I would ultimately be able to do. And so I had extra free time, oftentimes. So I loved helping out my classmates, doing things like some of them are thinking about buying their first car, and I was like, "What? 18% interest rate? No, 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 no. Let's figure something else out here." So like, um, help people set up like their first Roth IRA or figure out the TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan, the government defined contribution plan. And I really love helping people one on one with their money. I also got opportunity to volunteer through the VITA program, Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, that most bases and many other places around the US have, where help people prepare their tax returns. I always enjoyed doing taxes. So some training around that. Anyway, just building up these little ways. Let me back up just a quick second. One of the semesters in between college, I had considered going for what I thought was an internship and a giant, large insurance company who shall remain nameless. And I'm thankful it didn't work out. One of the reasons why is in the initial interview for that process, they slid kind of a sheet of paper across the desk. And they're like, could you fill this out with 100 names of your friends, family, and contact that we could use to get you started on what ultimately would have been a sales call? They didn't phrase it that way. I'm like, ooh, I don't like that. That feels weird. So my grandfather had a stockbroker too, and I didn't want to do that. So I didn't realize that there was an actual profession around financial advice, helping people. So I just started doing it on my own. Ultimately, got connected through the Airmen and Family Readiness Center, which in the Air Force is the ones that kind of host the personal financial managers, those financial counselors that are available for free to service members and their families. And I get exposure to things like the AFC accreditation, the training, the education around that, as well as the CFP, the Certified Financial Planner. But still not realizing that there's a profession out there that you can do this outside of this kind of little one-on-one. So I just kept doing that. I just kept helping people and loving not just the math side of it, like build an Excel sheet and how to model a debt payoff, or helping somebody just think about like budgeting versus saving at a fundamental level. Um, I just kept being a go-to guy in every unit and every squadron that I happened to be a part of, and I love that. So I thought, well, this is great. I'll just keep doing this, and I'll serve a full career and figure out what's next. Ultimately, some other stuff we can talk about in a minute is kind of short circuit speed up that process, but that's really what it was. I loved helping people. I loved personal finance, and mixing those two together with advice in a way that was helping them was something that just really energized me.
Yeah, so along the way, you did get some tidbits of like you didn't realize it was a profession, like you mentioned, but just you were exposed to AFC, CFPs, and just the world of finance.
Yeah, more education and training through those certifications certainly was attractive, but yet not at a place where I wanted to do that.
Okay, so what led you to go into to study at Kansas State?
Before we get to the Kansas State story, so I ultimately, in the personal side, started having to become more and more responsible for things on the home front. My wife Sarah started having a lot of health issues, and I became more and more of her full-time caregiver. And as a result of that, my Air Force career started to take a back seat or get put on the back burner. I could do less. I couldn't go TDY as much, if at all, and deployments became increasingly a challenge thing to do. That led to some pretty frank discussions with leadership and my mentors and things like that, where I began to realize that, oh, maybe this long-term active duty career serving 20 plus years is not going to be a possibility because I'm needed in this specific way. So it started to accelerate this process of I love personal finance. Maybe I'll do it when I get out in 20 plus years of career, right? To maybe I need to be thinking about a career transition much, much sooner. So this would have been like late 2015, 2016 timeframe. So I'd been on active duty for about 6, 7 years at this point in time. So I started doing the 1,000 cups of coffee idea and just starting informal networking in the local area through my alumni network, through LinkedIn, through on base personal finance counselors, and then through folks that I got to start meeting through organizations like FinCon, who were in the military money space, and just asking them, what do you do? How'd you get there? What education and training have you done? That was just a brilliant process of discovery, of learning good, bad, positive about things and the wide spectrum of options, not just financial planning and financial advice, but things like blogging and podcasting and YouTubing. And that kind of took me on a discovery. We're like, well, what do I really love doing? That's working one on one with people. By this time, I discovered like this thing called fiduciary and this world of like fee only financial planning where you're not selling products, you're not charging commission. And to me, that just rang true. Like I'd had some bad experiences with people trying to sell me products that weren't appropriate. My grandfather, another one, had been taken advantage of, like stolen several $100,000. So I'd seen the slimy underbelly of this services industry. I won't even call it a profession, what it wants to be. So I knew even then this very vague, nebulous idea of what I did and didn't want to do. So that led me to starting my academics work in the CFP program. I did it through the College for Financial Planning, all online, and started using some of my education benefits to pay for that. I already had a first master's in something completely unrelated. Looking back, I wouldn't have done that the same, but hindsight is 2020. So I started doing the CFP education coursework, starting to realize that maybe this career transition might happen sooner than later. And indeed, in 2017, Sarah's health deteriorated, and we spent about half the summer between hospitals across various states before ultimately coming home to hospice. And then she died in August of 2017. At the time, my paperwork was pending to separate in early 2018. So I'd already kind of made that leap, but now stood at kind of a career, personal life, everything crossroads about what's next. Thankfully, I'd had some time set aside to grieve and rest and recover. It took a sabbatical. And over that 8-month time period, really figured out, no, this is something that I still love. And now I can take purpose from this pain of what I've learned and now go and help other people, not just within the military community, but now potentially in the widowed community. And oftentimes I've seen now in that blend of that, which is the Gold Star widows. So purpose through the pain, and now taking what I've learned personally, professionally, finish the CFP program. That led me to launch my own financial planning practice where I do that kind of work as a true fiduciary, always working only my client's best interest, never selling products or commission, reducing that conflict of interest, and giving unlimited kind of financial planning advice. That is kind of what led me to, as I started working more and more on one-on-one with people, it's like, wow, there's more to money than numbers, which I had little glimpses of, but got to see deeper and deeper. And that's what led me to Kansas State and the journey of financial therapy and financial planning.
Yes. Okay. So along the way, you were already kind of practicing and working and had your own business. You mentioned Gold Star Widow. What is that?
Yeah, Gold Star widows are a term, I think, going back to either World War One or World War Two. It's early on, where represents those families who have made the ultimate sacrifice. So there were oftentimes, when you've heard of maybe Blue Star families as a contrast, where flags would be hung, say, in the window of a residence, with one blue star representing every member of that family who is away in military service. And then if that member was killed in the line of duty, then that star became a gold. So it kind of represent just a Gold Star widow is somebody who has lost a spouse while that spouse was serving on active duty.
Okay. My goodness. Well, I had heard about your story about Sarah, and my condolences. I know you are remarried now, but before all of that happened, um, somehow you got to Kansas State, and well, not somehow, but the journey led you to Kansas State. What were the kinds of things that you were learning? Why were you interested in going in that path? We are very similar in that I am fiduciary as well and fee only. I don't want that conflict of interest at all. Um, but yeah, and to me it makes sense to go into the behavioral finance. I guess you mentioned it a little bit earlier. You got a little bit of that in economics and learning about the decisions people make regarding their money. So yes, tell me a little bit about your experience at Kansas State.
As I think over my journey of working with people and their money, I think first of my own journey kind of shared some of that story along the way about how, even though I had a natural bent towards some of these things like saving and long-term investing, it still had some challenges. So I think back early on in my marriage with Sarah, we were married for just about 5 years. There were conflicts around money. Her personality was very different. She wanted to lean a bit more towards the spending side, and that created conflicts. I think probably most people in relationships can talk about money being a challenge, right? And so it's like, well, how do you approach it? Because not only do we have different philosophies around money and different maybe spending versus saving kind of aptitudes, but we also have different family of origin stories. Like, my upbringing is different than probably almost every listener out there, right? And especially in a marriage or a partnership, when you come together, a lot of these unwritten rules that you didn't even know were rules show up because your partner says, no, that's not the way things are. This is the way things are. And you go, absolutely not. Of course, it's this way over here, right? And so suddenly you're presented with a different reality, and that cannot provide opportunities for growth or conflict, right? And thankfully, over those years, we did get better at managing them. But at the same time, there were still challenges to be made. I am now remarried, and lo and behold, what do you know? Someone else has a different origin story around money and different kind of personal attitudes. So again, these things started coming up with me personally, right? And then seeing that with clients, that I could give the best advice possible. Go do X, Y, and Z, and it will keep you on track for your goals. And they might not do it, or they might only do it part way, or they might start doing it and then stops going, okay. Well, it goes back to this idea that I remember from undergrad about econs, this imaginary creature, this imaginary person that is entirely rational, logical, right? Think Spock, right? No emotion. I only do what's logical or rational. And then much of the early academic literature in economics was based on this idea that everybody was only and absolutely logical. Of course, that doesn't match up with reality. And that's where this field of behavioral economics, behavioral finance started to come from, say, like, well, wait a minute. There are these biases, there's these mental hurdles, these challenges that we all have that prevent us from thinking correctly about money or doing it in ways that truly are in our best interest. So now, well, that's good enough to know that, okay, so we got some challenges. I've got some challenges, my clients have some challenges. What do we do about it? And it's not good enough just to say, okay, we got some problems. Well, how do we fix it, right? And that's the beauty of what led me to the world of financial therapy, which is, okay, for a long time, the world of mental health, therapists, etc., did not talk much, if at all, about money. And then on the flip side of that is people in the financial professions rarely, if ever, talked about emotions or mental health. But yet, research today, and I think probably the audience would listen and agree, say like this idea of financial well-being is more than dollars and cents. It's hopes, fears, dreams, and we tie them together, and that link needs something there. And that is what financial therapy can be born is. How do we take these things that we know work from the world of mental health interventions and understanding the way the brain works and helping people think differently, and we apply that to the realm of money. And conversely, people who know their financial planning backwards and forwards and all the formulas and the quote unquote right math answers, how do we integrate a human first approach that takes into account who people are, what they're actually going to do, and integrate that, right? And so this is an integrative discipline. And that's the beauty of this is it's not, I am not trying to become a therapist in the sense I'm not diagnosing, I'm not prescribing, I'm not treating. But when clients come to me and they share things like what we've talked about today, early memories around money, like is money a source of stress, of conflict? What are some things we can do to move the needle on financial well-being, financial health that go beyond, well, save X and you'll be just fine, right? But in a more integrative approach. And that's the beauty. I love it. But even more than all of that, first and foremost for me was the idea of better understanding, exploring my own money story in the journey. Because the idea of therapist, right, is you have to know yourself before you can help others, and you can only help someone as far as you've been willing to go yourself. The last piece of that is how do you remove your own self, the biases from the therapy process, so you don't transfer, right, that idea of transference, your own issues onto your person that you're working with, your client. So all those combined. So even if I got no benefits out of helping clients, and I have a lot, if all I got out of it was the personal benefits, it would have still been worth it. And that is the beauty of this journey of combining technical expertise, which is basic table stakes. Like no one, in my opinion, should be giving advice for a living unless they have that. But that's not enough. And especially in this world of, increasing intelligence like AI and algorithms that can get the correct book answer, bridging that gap with a human element is going to be the differentiator, even if everything else changes.
Makes sense to me. We definitely think similar to one another because as I'm working with clients, I notice, some people don't do the work. There are those who are just gung ho, go like they turn things around within 5 meetings. And then there are those I need to spend a little more time with or who come back. And so, yeah, it definitely, you need not only the technical education, but definitely some type of um, therapy or mental health and education as well. So again, makes sense to me. So do you feel like any of your education helped you to I guess change the way you were practicing? I know every time I learn something, I'm reading a book now and just I'm always evolving like the way I work with people. What were some things that you implemented that you learned from your education?
When I think back about, like, especially in the therapy world and understanding how to meet clients where they're at, the thing that I've really evolved in my practice is breaking the planning process down and the elements of a good financial plan, things like cash flow and insurance and estate planning and taxes and investments, benefits, all those kind of things together, right? That collectively make up a good financial plan, is to take it away from a plan delivery to a planning process. In other words, break it down into the smallest parts, do some rank order and prioritization based on what I see as the biggest need, like life insurance. Like you're underinsured. Okay, we need to get that taken care of right away. But at the same time, recognize the client may have a very distinct pain point, like, oh, I just got killed in taxes. Let's do something about that or understand it, right? Addressing those things first, using a small win early on to generate positive momentum. Like, especially when people come to me overwhelmed, confused, tired of researching, right? Google gives all the answers, but doesn't tell you which is the right one. These things of just overwhelm and just saying, all right, let's cut through the clutter and make it applicable to you. Generate a small win off of that and build momentum rather than what I might have done more before was, all right, give me all your questions. All right, great. We're going to sit down and we're going to have one giant meeting and we're going to answer them all. And it's just like over their heads and just drowning. And oh man, he just told me all the answers, but it's so much work and all this stuff. So helping to realize that. And this other discipline comes from the world of solution focused therapy, which I apply in the solution focused financial therapy, which is all about finding those small little things that the client has already been doing well, dig into, figure out what was different about that. Oh, this is how you did. Okay. Can we apply some of those lessons elsewhere using a significant amount of praise to the client, helping to increase their confidence in themselves, and then scaling questions. Love scaling questions on a scale of 1 to 10. How ready are you to make a change, or how do you feel about this? And then based on their answer in their positive self-talk, you can ask them questions like, okay, well, you answered a 5 on that question. Tell me why not a 4, and helps them think through the issue, right? They have the answer. They can do it on themselves. It's just providing that support, that encouragement along the way. So those are two prominent changes that definitely stand out to me, thinking about what I've learned and how I've changed and how I work with clients.
Yeah. So in your journey thus far, have you experienced financial highs and lows? What was it like? Were you just kind of cruising through pretty much in the middle? I know you had personal experiences, life experiences, but when it comes to money, like any of your um could you have benefited from a financial counselor or therapist, like any decisions you've made that don't really align with sound financial advice?
Mm. I think of my personal journey of like financial highs and lows. A financial high would have probably been like the first year I was able to max out my Roth IRA for the first time, and then setting a next goal of, okay, well, let me do that and see if I can hit a maximum on the thrift savings plan. Looking back, I was probably over saving as a relative to where I am at today. I work with clients now, kind of a more of a consumption smoothing approach to understanding lifestyle expenses and goals all across the lifespan. Um, that probably would have been something that working with a financial professional could have helped me see, right? I was saving towards an arbitrary target, not something very specific. Helping clients think through the why is a lot. I love doing that. So I could have benefited from that. And financial lows, I mean, certainly that scary leap of leaving the only world of income I'd known, active duty officer, to not just leaving the military, but leaving for the world of entrepreneurship, where not only was my income zero, it was kind of negative early on as I had to spend money to get the business up and running. So, yeah, talk about a low, like, ooh, is this going to make it work? Now, that did not make that leap without some financial planning ahead of time, having set aside a good amount of cash ready to go in case I needed to fund lifestyle expenses. Ultimately, through a variety of other circumstances and remarriage, my wife's income helped cover a lot of the bills at that time. So wasn't quite as scary as going from a good amount to negative. There was a buffer in between, but certainly just recognizing that it was not going to be the same. Right. And in some ways, what were those trade offs going to look like of lost earnings power over for a couple of years to where not only got back to where I was at before, but started to catch up from some of that ground. So, and that goes back to the idea of, spreading your financial goals over timelines, right? Sometimes when we work with clients, we say, all right, is this a near term goal? We're going to spending that. We're going to save for that differently than we are say for something 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years away. And understanding all that together has been a big help for me, especially now as I work on not just my own financial plan, but bringing in an external thinking partner to help me and my wife now.
Yeah, and perfect. I was going to ask, you mentioned earlier about like how different everyone is. When you bring two people together, it's never going to be like perfect. Like there's differences. We were all raised differently. Our experiences just shape us differently. How have you worked with your wife to get on the same page financially?
Slowly and steadily working together is probably the best thing that I found as far as integrating finances as a couple. Um, and then recognize that you both have strengths and weaknesses. So, what can you do to lean on each other's strengths rather than pick on the weaknesses? In other words, accentuate the strengths rather than try to fix all the weaknesses. That's what I found personally and professionally often works better. And so, if one of us is better at doing this part of our financial planning, financial spending, great. Let that person kind of take the lead. On the other part of that is too is when I see professionally working with widows, oftentimes many of them have never been that chief financial officer, that CFO role in their household, and they didn't know anything, right? There'd never been any kind of joint communication about sitting down and, hey, not only just here's where the accounts are, but here's what they're for, and here's what we're working towards, right? So having those kind of conversations, even if you delegate roles and responsibilities, which is very common, in fact, makes sense for a lot of reasons, having the opportunity to sit down as a couple and regularly review progress. So monthly, that might be the regular spending, and several times a year, that might be the long-term savings and investing. And at least once a year, that's the big picture stuff like, hey, has things changed with the estate plan? Do we need to update beneficiaries? Now that we've got another kid, what's that going to look like? Those kind of questions, helping to step back. And if you are listening to this and thinking, I've never done any of those things, that might be a clue that you might need some help and would benefit from working with a professional who would help you come alongside and ask those questions, be that neutral party, but also an accountability mechanism. So that's something that we have found to be helpful too. Even though I'm a financial planner, I have hired a financial planner before, and that accountability, that external partner allows you to offload stress, but also have a critical voice that says, oh, have you thought about this? We all have blinders on, especially to our own stuff. Goes back to the idea of, the old saying, the cobbler's children have no shoes, right? Here's somebody who does something for a living, right? A profession, and yet doesn't take care of the family in the same way. That often happens in financial planning, financial services as well. So some things to think about there.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you definitely need someone else's eyes and experiences to in all professions, but even with financial planners. I haven't worked with someone outside of myself yet, but yeah, if you could share more about that experience, what was maybe one or two things they were able to point out to you that you might not have noticed or been paying attention to?
So one of the biggest things that I benefited from personally working with my own financial planner was something that I've helped clients with, but didn't experience in the same way, which is permission. And I don't mean like I can do this and this person has a veto power. I mean it in I'm thinking about goal XYZ and it feels scary and I'm not sure if it's going to work. And I'm caught up in my own head and the fears and overthinking it, maybe even another way to think about it. And bring this to another person who doesn't have those same fears and internal dialogue and all that stuff, and take an objective look, right? And say, yes, that's possible. In fact, it's more than possible. It'd be great. And I think it would be great based on all the other things you've shared. And it fits into your overall financial plan and goals and risk tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. Right. It's just like, oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing. That's all I needed. That was worth all the money that we paid right there, just for that feeling and being able to step back and say, oh, and the beauty of this is, right, in going back to the therapy kind of idea, in the world of therapists, if you are a therapist and you don't have your own therapist, that's actually something that's kind of looked down upon in many ways. Like you need to be doing your own work, not just in training and preparation academic, but on an ongoing basis. So it's very interesting that in our world of financial services and counseling and planning and advice and all this kind of stuff, that is more the exception than the rule, where we work with other people. And perhaps that's something that I think we'd all benefit from. One, the recognition, the feeling of what it's like to get financially naked in front of somebody else who's an expert. It's not always comfortable, right? It's like, ooh, there's some anxiety around here, right? What is that going to look like? What is it? Am I going to be judged? Right. So knowing what that feels like as a client yourself, and two, seeing benefits of things like I just mentioned, like I want to do this. I'm stuck in my own head. Help me figure that out.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, even myself, like that would I probably help to get another person's opinion on my situation. So we're nearing the end. How do you feel you've evolved? I think I kind of already asked this question, but how do you feel you've evolved with your beliefs and the way you've managed money over time?
As I think about the evolution of my financial journey, it is definitely moved across the spectrum. If you think of one end is technical expertise and competence, right? The whole I know the answer, here's what math says, right? And that's really where I started at personally and professionally, well, helping other people. And I'd say now I've come full 180 to the other side. It's like, I can give you the best answer, but what you really need is just a hug right now. And embracing empathy as a part of that journey. Um, Financial advice is something that is a sacred responsibility, deeply rooted, not just in that fiduciary or working with best, but holding carefully, gingerly people's hopes, fears, and dreams. Because that's what money's about. It's not about the dollars and the cents. And when people invite you into that space and say, I have this thing, I have these questions, right? Treating that with the care, with the respect, with the reverence that that deserves. And that means absolutely technical competence. You must do that. I equate it to many ways to the Hippocratic Oath in the medical profession. First, do no harm. And you must know your stuff because we're talking about things that, just like a doctor or a medical professional, if I make the wrong thing, there could be severe health consequences. Same way, we might give advice that has severe negative financial consequences. So, knowing your stuff and then going beyond that and saying, here, let me come alongside you and help you and be that listening ear or that critical thinking partner or just that friendly hug.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Any final piece of advice you would share with listeners who are on their own on their own financial journeys? Anything you'd like to share or can share with them about um, continuing doing the right things, anything like that?
As I think about the journey of money that we're all on at various stages and opportunities and places, is it can sometimes feel, certainly from media or the popular culture around us, that we're swimming in the sea of materialism. And it's all about the stuff or the experiences or things like that, right? And it's easy to get caught up in what the researchers call mimetic desire, which is I want it because I see somebody else has it, or because I saw the advertisement or the commercial or something like that. And separating that stimulus from response is something that takes practice to be able to do. To say, like, I want that. That's interesting. Why? And taking it back to a more internal values kind of thing. Like, what are the things that are the most important to me? And am I spending money? Am I using my financial resources? That may be time, talent, energy, things like that, not just money as a part of that. And am I doing that in a way that aligns best with what's most important to me? Over the years working with people in money, oftentimes I see the most financial unhappiness, financial unwell-being, lack of it, is when values are not aligned with money. Okay. And that is a very internal, personal decision. But if all of our decisions are driven by these external factors, right? I see what somebody else has, I want it, or I'm trying to do this to please somebody else or something like that, and not having done the internal work, going to be left floundering. And you may be the best budgeter and the best saver and the best investor and things like that. But if you haven't missed that internal work first of what is important to me, defining values, doing a careful evaluation of how am I using my time, talent, resources, money as a part of that to live that out. And if you're not, start there. because everything else will flow much better when it's coming from a place of that. And that is the beauty of this work, is it's not a one and done, because who we are evolves over time and our life circumstances change too. So coming back to that and using that as the guiding principle is something that I think has benefited me. I've seen it benefit clients, and I'm confident it will benefit every listener as well.
Thank you so much, Dan. Please share your name and the way listeners can best follow along with you and your journey and the work that you're doing.
Well, thanks for having me here to have this discussion, Melissa. It's been a pleasure. People can learn more about me on my website, wisestewardshipfp.com. That's for my firm, Wise Stewardship Financial Planning. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. You can look me up there, Daniel M, as in Mike Kopp, Kopp, and love to connect there. If you're also interested in getting into the financial planning, financial services field, I host a podcast called Military to Financial Planner. Kind of shares a lot of these lessons about a career change for those that might be interested in learning more about that.
Yes. Thank you once again. And we will end there.